2009. My name is Joe Bruckner. I'm a volunteer with the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm here with Tony Hilliard, who is also a volunteer with the History Center, and Mr. Lyall Angevine, who has kindly agreed to come and share his story of his life, and particularly that part leading up to World War II, what he did during World War II and thereafter. And Mr. Angevine, we surely appreciate you coming and taking your time to talk with us today.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm not sure how interesting it's going to be, but I've had some unusual experiences.
Well, I'm sure it will be interesting. And before we start, let me ask you one question just to get in this on the record, a couple of questions. Could you give us your full name, your address, and your date of birth?
Oh, yeah. My name is Lyall Seaver Angevine, and I was born April 28th, 1921 in Osco, Illinois. Osco is a big town. They've got 75 people now.
Was it about the same size when you were
Same
born?
size, and hadn't changed any. Right.
Would you tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
Well, I was raised on a dairy farm. My dad was a little different. He was a little advanced. We had electric fences, and we had milking machines and cream separators, and we had a little separate building for the dairy. We called it the dairy house, where we'd separate the milk from the cream and put it in the 5-gallon cans and all that stuff. And being raised on a dairy farm in the 30s during the Depression was a real experience, because very few people had any money, but we at least had something to eat being on a farm. And we were able to survive, and didn't know we lived rather well, actually. But I think that probably one of the most important things that I learned was, if you live on a farm of any kind, it depends on how hard you want to work as to how successful you're going to be. You're either going to have good crops, and good fences, and good buildings, or you're going to be a slovenly, lazy farmer and not keep them up, and it looks bad for the neighborhood and everything else. But I was always fortunate in having been brought up to be neat. I didn't like it, because when you're out in August and along a hedgerow, and the corn is 6 feet tall on one side and the hedge is 9 feet tall on the other, and you're in there with a scythe cutting down smartweeds, that's the name of them. Temperature about 110, and there is no relief. But that's part of being a farmer. And somewhere down the road, I think everybody would appreciate that experience. I know that it made me a better person. It's made me a better person for being there. And as far as my early upbringing was concerned, I went to high school, graduated from high school. And then 3 of us decided that we were going to California to see Stanford play Nebraska in the Rose Bowl. So we loaded up, one of the guys worked at the shops. That was a popular name for the John Deere Plow Company, which is in Moline, Illinois, about 20 miles away from where I lived. And he had worked in the shops. He never even graduated from high school, but he had the car. We had a business coupe, no back seat, just a business coupe. And it was not the easiest transportation in the world, but we started out driving, and we drove nonstop from Osco, Illinois, until we got to Los Angeles, California. And we got out there just during the time of the holiday season. And we went to the Whittier Hotel, which happens to be where I found out later Richard Nixon was a member of that Whittier YMCA. And we didn't have any money to speak of, but we got in there and talked our way into being able to sleep on a billiard table. We slept on billiard tables the first night we were in LA. And that was an experience that I don't want to repeat again anytime soon. But somewhere along the line, we all decided that we were going to stay there. We loved the climate. But we decided to go down to San Diego, because there was a big aircraft plant there called Consolidated Aircraft. They had transferred their situation from Buffalo, New York to San Diego, and they were just getting the building completed when we got there. And we had to go to school to get a job. I went for a while. I was in school from 9 to 11 was an aircraft school. You learned how to turn sheet metal and diagram things of that sort. And at the same time, I was working sanding ping pong tables at an NYA project. And my evenings were my greatest thrill. I was setting pins in a bowling alley. Had a nickel a line. I got a nickel a line. I think bowling was only 10 cents a line then. And that's the hardest work I'll ever do in my life. But some of the characters that you met there, you'd see guys that were former baseball players. They'd be over the corner calling pitches and everything. No idea where they were. They were drunk or completely out of it. But they were setting pins in a bowling alley for a living. And when I got through with that, I also did some car simonizing. That helped keep me in bread and butter.
Now, this was still during the Depression, before World War II, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is 1938,
38, okay.
39. And we were all about the same class trying to get into this business of the aircraft business. And we were finally graduated from the school and went to work at Consolidated, 50 cents an hour. And if you were lucky, you got to take the night shift where you got a nickel bonus. 55 cents an hour, 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. And the first paycheck I got was $29.65. And I went out and bought an automobile. I went out and bought a Ford convertible with a rumble seat and 2 side mount white wall tires. $5 down and $5 a week. And I thought that I'd have died and gone to heaven. But that was the beginning of it. And then as I went along, I was very fortunate in the business at Consolidated. I happened to be in the hydraulics department. And the B-24 was mostly hydraulic operated, landing gear, bomb bay doors, the Sperry pilot, flaps, wings, everything. And I got in the hydraulics department. I was the youngest guy there. We'd have teams. If you showed any ambition, you worked hard installing tubes and memorizing the tube numbers and what they went to and so forth. Because when you got through analyzing that and learning that, you might be given a test stand. To have a hydraulic test stand meant you had 5 people working with you, 1 in the cockpit handling the controls, 1 on either side watching the wings, and 1 on either side watching the wheels. And we had a tragic thing happen the first year that I was in that. A painter, a female painter, was up in the wing. Somebody ran the flaps up, didn't do it, and cut her head off. Well, that prompted immediately the design of a tube that fit the piston that drove the hydraulic flap for the wing, that you had to have those on every time you turned the test stand or it wouldn't run. And I was fortunate enough in 1940, when Willow Run was being built, Ford Motor Company was being built up there to build B-24s. And the Army came into San Diego at that time, and Eddie Rickenbacker just got back from being lost overseas. And Undersecretary of War Patterson was there, and we had a big dinner for Mr. Rickenbacker. And we had a liaison man whose name was Charles Lindbergh. And he worked with all of us guys from these other plants.
And this was the Charles Lindbergh.
The Charles Lindbergh. First time I'd ever seen a car with a radio in it. He had one in 1944 in the glove compartment. And he was our man. One night we got in trouble. We were all celebrating having a $7 a day per diem to spend our extra money on. And we got in a little nightclub one night at a place called Ecorse, Michigan. And some guy pulled a gun out in the middle of a dance floor. Well, another buddy and I went through the screen door, didn't even open it. We just went right through it. And Brother Lindbergh came down and got us out of jail that night. But that's a true story. And the other guy that went through the door with me is still living in Orlando, Florida, dear friend. But after we got settled into our routine there at Willow Run, they chose some of us to send to other companies. They sent them to Willow Run to teach Ford how to build 24s.
Now, this was in Michigan now, right?
Michigan, Ypsilanti, Michigan. And our accommodations there were unusual. We stayed at the Dearborn Inn. The Dearborn Inn is a very exclusive place to sleep and eat, and just the pianos playing down in the lobby, because nobody had ever come in there and organized a poker game or had sat around and played poker until 10 o'clock at night, because everything shut down at 9. But that was part of our introduction up there, and they'd call you in the morning and say, "Good morning, it's 7 o'clock and 7 below." And you could look out your window, and there were the pheasants down along the little stream at the Dearborn Inn, just as beautiful as they could be. So there were representatives there from Boeing in Seattle on the engines. There were guys there from Bell in Buffalo on part of the servo unit. That was the automatic pilot. And we stayed there. We went up there for 60 days. We stayed 6.5 months. I had to get all my clothes from San Diego shipped up there to where I could live in the weather. And we had a marvelous time up there, but that's while we were up there is when Secretary Patterson met us and told us that if we stayed in the industry, we would not be drafted. And that was a kind of an important piece of information at that time.
Yeah.
Because when we got, there were 3 of us that decided we were going to leave San Diego and go to Birmingham, because we had heard about a modification center being built there by Ralph McCone, Bechtel, McCone, and Parsons. They built the Alaska pipeline. Oh, they're huge contractors. Well, they had a deal with the Air Force to build this B-24 plant and build B-24s there and modify them in Birmingham. So we 3 of us drove down to Birmingham. We had a guy with a Packard convertible. We all 3 drove down that Packard convertible with the top down. We all had our sleeves turned back. We were like bait up to above our wrists. And we got into Birmingham at about 10 o'clock at night, and we went to the Redmont Hotel. It was on 5th Avenue, and we came right in on 5th Avenue. It was a highway of some sort. And we wound up with Governor Chauncey Sparks' suite. He had just been there the week before. Chauncey Sparks was the governor of Birmingham, Alabama at that time. And we got all the perks that he had. We had fruit baskets and everything else. But we didn't stay there too long. It was a relatively expensive operation. And from the time that we had that experience and stayed up at the Dearborn Inn and everything, the war had gotten to the point that it was about to wind down.
Now, let me back up a little
Right
bit.
ahead.
Matt. Where were you when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Where was I when Pearl Harbor broke?
You were still, I guess you were still working out of
Oh
California.
yeah, I was still a civilian. Larry Tonda and I had 2 girls from up at Lake Tahoe, and we were up in the mountains skiing. And we came back home, and all the lights were out along the ocean, and we were hearing on the radio about Pearl Harbor. And that was a scary story, to say the least.
So it had happened while you were up there, and nobody knew up there.
That's right, everyone knew we were there. But when we got down there, we had to drive home at night. If we were working the night shift, because there was always a submarine out there somewhere in the distance. They felt there was going to be an attack, and they'd send us home at 10 o'clock at night or midnight or something like that. And we'd drive home with the dimmers on the cars and driving maybe 20 miles an hour. And it was a real experience, because it brought the war home to you a little closer than just reading about it in the newspaper and that sort of thing.
Was the factory blacked out?
Well, the factory was blacked out completely. And I found later that Consolidated had one of the best camouflage systems in the United States. It was a long factory. It was about 3 miles long. And to cover it, they had put woven wire netting with camouflage, feathers and things of that sort. The whole top of the plant was covered. You couldn't see it from the air. And it was a real thought-provoking thing to have that kind of protection for you.
What was the atmosphere out there right after that? I mean, just it was so close to where
a lot of
everything-
people were scared, of course. A lot of people, well, we had some things there consolidated. We had 7 B-24s on the flight line, and we flew all of them. And since I was a hydraulics expert, I got to go with them. They flew all 7 of them out there the first night after Pearl Harbor. We flew into Albuquerque, New Mexico. We had a landing field there. But all the people were scared at first, and then they got a little more patriotic, and they decided to tough it out, stay there as long as they could if we weren't attacked. And it all worked out very well because we never had an attack on the homeland. We were worried about it, but we never had one. And a lot of people that were, well, let's say we had some people there that were afraid of what would happen. And they beat a hasty retreat. Some of them left their jobs, some of them left their houses and moved in town maybe 30 or 40 miles from San Diego just to get off the coast on account of the Japs Navy.
Now, when you said they flew 7 of the B-24s into Albuquerque, was that to get away from a potential attack?
Oh yeah, just to get them out of sight. And there was an Air Force base there at Albuquerque, and we had all kinds of scares, real, imagined, whatever you want to call them. But by and large, after we got used to it, our lifestyle didn't change a bit. We were not worried about an attack, and we were still working 10 hours a day, and that was it.
Would you describe the operation of the B-24 plant?
Well, the B-24 plant was one of the first in the United States. Ford copied it. It was the first one to have a moving assembly line for 4-engine bombers. And it was a huge place because the tracks, they were mounted on tracks like a railroad track, and they would be sectionized. For instance, when the fuselage section, and they were on an angle, they weren't dead across, they were on about a 45-degree angle. They'd get more equipment in there that way. But we would have the fuselage, that was the first part of the plane that was assembled, and it would be the start of the assembly line, and then we would add wings and flaps and landing gear and wheels and all the interior stuff to it as it came on down the line. Then when it got down the line to the end, you're at the end of the assembly line, then it went outside to flight. And we no longer had anything to do with it unless there was a control problem or something like that. But it was I thought it was something I'd never see before or never see again, to see an assembly line like that. And you've got men, women, all over the airplanes working on them. You've got drop cords, you've got test machines, you've got rivet guns, everything under the sun going on at the same time. And it was really a team effort, and it worked out very well. Then when we got this call to go up to Willow Run, when we came back, we had all heard about this modification center that they were building in Birmingham. And naturally, you're always looking for more money. Well, we were making $1.25 an hour by that time from 55 cents. We got our raise, we got back at $1.25 an hour. And our secretary up at Willow Run, and she had a bicycle, which we didn't get to use. She was making $1.50 an hour. So we knew we were underpaid. So we decided we'd go to Birmingham and see if we could get a job. And it was Bechtel, McCone, and Parsons, and Ralph Parsons was in charge of the plant there in Birmingham.
This is Birmingham, Alabama.
Birmingham, Alabama. And I called him person to person and told him that I was with Consolidated, and They had just come back from Willow Run and knew they were building a mod center there at Birmingham, and I'd like to come there and get a job. He said, well, I can't talk to you as long as you're working for another defense plant, but I can assure you, if you get to Birmingham and you haven't been drafted, there will be a job for you. And there was a guy there when you get discharged from Birmingham, from California, you write on your little discharge card, hope this man is drafted immediately. And I said, well, Mr. Batchelder, I never forget that man's name. I said, Mr. Batchelder, I'm still registered with my draft board up in Illinois. And they're all farmers, and they've known me since I was born. And I don't think they're going to draft me, because I'll have another job within 48 hours when I leave here. And I did. So the three of us got down there, we became head inspectors. And I wound up, we had 7 of these huge bays. They would hold 6 B-24s apiece. And we had a huge, it was right at the airport, we had doubled the size of the runways and doubled everything there at the airport there in Birmingham. But when we got there with the modification center, everybody did everything they could to find something else to bring business in. We modified P-38s. We put mirrors, cameras in P-38s. We took B-25s. We didn't know they were modifying them to fly off an aircraft carrier, but we did it right there in Birmingham. And when we found out, because we knew the tail numbers, when we saw those those B-25s going off that carrier, it really made our hearts sing, I'll guarantee you.
I'll bet.
So
for the bombing run on Tokyo.
That's
early
right.
in the war.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was really a Jimmy Doolittle.
Right. Yeah.
And things like that, you never forget them. But now that I'm old, I remember them with not as much clarity, but perhaps a better feeling of how fortunate I was to be brought up at that particular time. Rickenbacker's lost. Undersecretary Patterson comes up there. He interviews us individually, and our draft board gets a letter from him. Well, now you can't ask for a better break than that.
Yeah.
I mean, I was not a coward. I went down to volunteer. This other guy that we were up there with the Tahoe with, he was an ex-Navy aviation machinist mate, and he could have gotten a rate, but they wouldn't take us. They wouldn't even talk to us as long as we were consolidated, which was fine with us.
Well, you saved a lot of lives by building those planes the right way.
Oh, yeah. We sure as hell did. And we were very fortunate to have the opportunity to do that. And of course, when the war was over, there were 2 of us left there on presidential deferments. One was a B-29 pilot, and I had 600 people working for me in all this inspection, in all those modification bays, 3 shifts. I had about 600 people working for me. And Russ Craig was this B-29 pilot, and I was modification supervisor. And the day that Roosevelt died, we were in the Navy. Well, I was in the Navy 2 weeks later, and he was in the Marine Air Corps.
Now, talk about how that happened and what happened when you went into the Navy.
I had you meet a lot of people when you're in the defense business, and there was a great big guy there, Ed Karp, K-A-R-P, and he had been a naval aviator in the First World War, and he was working for Bechtel then. And he said, Lyall, I've got a couple of strings that I can pull for you if you want me to. He says, what do you want to do? I said, I want to get in the Navy. I didn't want any damn part of that Army. And I didn't care where it was or anything else. And I managed to do that. I got in the Navy, and a very short period of time, I reported to Great Lakes for boot camp. And I remember it was such a pleasant thought there. You sit there in boot camp and see those trains going by to Waukegan with the cocktails and the girls and all up on there. And I'm sitting there making $52 a month at boot camp. But it was all right. It didn't last that long. I got overseas. That was the first thing I volunteered for because you got extra points. And I was in the ship's company again, unfortunately, they called out for volunteers to work in the ship's company while we were there at Great Lakes. And we would get privileges. We'd get to have not stand any watches, no 10-count manual guns or anything. I couldn't handle one day of my life depended on. But we also got to be inside and volunteer for work. Well, they said, how many of you guys have got a typing or bookkeeping degree? I said, well, I've had typing and bookkeeping in high school. So what do? I volunteer. The first time I ever volunteered for SKD, and Striker Dispersing Storekeeper. And they were the last ones to go. Because aboard ship, I had my own bunk. And when the alarm went off, all hands out, I'm in there protecting the money, the payroll. And I had a strange thing happen while I was up there doing that. We were at Brooklyn Navy Yard. We'd caught the typhoon in Okinawa and went up to Brooklyn Navy Yard. And the captain was a nice old guy, and he said, Angevine, how about picking up the payroll today? I said, fine, I got nothing better to do. So I go waltzing over there, and I got a suitcase or a little ditty bag in both hands. And I get over there and get $43,000 or whatever the payroll was that week. And I'm coming back, and these two MPs come up to me. I said, what's in the bag? I said, oh, a little payroll money. Oh, sure, what is it? Open it up. 245s are staring me right in the face. I said, what in the hell are you doing with that payroll money? I said, I'm taking it back to the ship. He said, son, you don't do that without an armed guard. I said, well, nobody told me. So I got out of that one without a hair being blown off, but it's stuff like that that happens to you that you just can't recall what caused it or how you were fortunate enough to get out without getting at least kicked with his butt, discharged dishonorably or something like that. But
Talk about your experience of getting on the ship and heading to Okinawa. What you were doing there, what that was like.
There again, I got lucky. We got on this ARG-9 at Guam. We shipped out of Seattle to go to Guam and get a ship. And it's a diesel repair ship. And we had a bunch of hunkies on there from Pennsylvania and place, machinist mates. And they asked us for volunteers for various duties aboard ship. Well, I didn't know anything about machinist mate, but I said, well, what do you got available? I said, I'll do most anything. I said, how about the kitchen? I said, you want to work in the kitchen? I said, well, something like that. He said, how about the meat locker? I said, oh, that's even better. I said, I used to work in a meat locker at Henry County at the Farm Bureau, where we bring our meat in and store it there in the farm, for freezing. Sam Andrews, Samuel Rayford Andrews, and I were together from the day we hit boot camp till the day we hit that damn
The boat, the ship.
the meat locker. And the meat locker consisted of all the fresh fruit and vegetables you wanted, anything under the damn greasy sun you wanted. And we just had a great time in the Navy. Never had a hard day.
Did you get to Okinawa?
Oh yeah, we got to Okinawa. Got caught in the typhoon. Our top speed was 13 knots. We were going out 13 knots. We were being blown in 25 knots. So we got up and hit a sandbar. Why the hell they ever did it, but they decided they were going to repair us temporarily and send us to Brooklyn Navy Yard, which we didn't really need. They didn't need the ship. War was over just about.
Where were you when you heard that the bombs had been dropped on Japan and the war was over?
Well, I was still there on the ship, the ARG-9, and of course that was cause for great rejoicing. We were not very far out at sea. We knew we'd get called back from service then. So next thing we knew, we were coming under the old lady Brooklyn Navy Yards. It's about 28 degrees, and I'm in my whites. That's all I had. But
That had to be an emotional experience.
it was emotional as it could be because, number one, the war just about being over, you know that you're not going out to sea. You know you're not going back out very far at least. And that meant a quick discharge. And striking for an SKD, that got that one extra point for you. And it was a simple thing. In fact, I met an old lady last night here. She was from the York River here in Virginia. And I said, what the hell was the name of that place? The York River.
Naval Weapons Station?
Naval
Weapons Station?
A discharge station there on the York River. That's where I got my discharge from the Navy, was the York River.
When you were on the ship before the war ended, was there a feeling that the guys on your ship were going to be part of the invasion force
No.
into
No.
Japan?
See, we were not part of the invasion force. We were a support ship. We had to keep the mechanics going, and that's why we were full of machinery,
Okay.
lathes, drills, and things of that sort, to make parts for the front runners.
I got you.
No, we never had any dream of being in the attack force.
Now, when did you get out of the service? Approximately.
I was in about 14 months. I got out in April of 45, I believe it was. April of 45. And it was, just like, you just had a ice cream cone given to you. You're out, you got your service bar, you got your little pins up there, and you're out.
Well, now, when you were in the service, not just the Navy, but also involved in the assembly of the B-24s, did you realize you were part of one of the biggest events in world history?
Yeah. You're when you're in San Diego, and you have alerts for Japanese submarines and all this stuff, and you get sent home, half your shift is over and everything, you become very aware of it. You really do. And of course, knowing that the B-24s were as vital as they were, the first 32 of them, when I walked into the assembly, there were 7 outside and 32 inside. You know what it said in the tail? 32 MF, military France. They'd already been sold to France.
Wow.
We had 7, and we had sold 32 to France, for God's
Is
sakes.
that right?
That made me wonder about our
That's
procurement.
That's interesting.
Yep. But it was just a very short time thing for me, and it was very fortunate. I just stood there, I just stood and watched as I'd done anything the Navy wanted me to, but I just happened to get lucky. That's just all I can say for it.
When the B-24s were on the assembly line, how long would it take from
Well, it took
beginning-
about 17 days. Now, Ford always said they were going to produce one every 24 hours. The 24 B-24, they never did it. And we got to 17, and that was as high as we ever got. Because there's a lot of parts with those big babies, and a lot of man hours. But
What kind of steps did they take in the plant to prevent espionage?
we had a lot of security. I mean, you had down in the tool sheds, for instance, when you go down there to check out a drill, you had to have a certain clearance to get that drill. Or when you went over to the parts department to get a certain part, you had to sign a chit showing what airplane that part was going into. They had a lot of security. I'm glad they did.
Do you have any idea how many B-24s are left? Sometimes you see them in various...
There's two that I know of because they both flew over Atlanta here recently 2 years ago. they got a B-17 and a B-24 called the Dixie Flyboys or something. And I took my son out there, and he got in both of them. And we flew in the B-24. I went flying in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they had changed it. I went, the emergency landing gear was the toughest damn thing about that airplane. And when you're trying to get the gear down back behind the wing on the bulkhead, they had this beautiful crank. And you had to crank the wheels down to get them down and locked. And it was hard to get to. It was cold as hell. There was no heat back there. And when we got back, that was the hardest thing that I had to remember, was how many times we ran that damn wheel down. If it didn't come down fast enough, it wouldn't lock. And when it didn't lock, run them back up. Some guy pushed the button, runs it back out, and I get out that damn crank again. But that was the first thing I looked for, is that damn wheel system was still there. It was still there.
God.
And that one on the ground here. But it was a great experience. That's all I can say.
When you first got out, what was the attitude in the country of the people now that the war was over?
Oh, the war was over. They didn't give a damn. I never had anybody check at me because I didn't serve very long or anything like that, because I was in related industry.
Yeah.
But I knew some guys that they had some shit thrown in the mailboxes out on the farm because they were farming instead of going in.
Oh, yeah. Gosh.
And some of them I knew.
Huh.
Yep. So it's, but it was not as bad as a lot of folks painted it. We,
What did you do after you got out, just briefly?
Mr. S.K. Bechtel called me from New York. He said, "Lyall, I understand you're out of the Navy. We've got a job for you." I said, "Great, where is it?" "Manila." I said, "No, I just came back. I'm not in Manila." I worked with a carpenter. I was mixing mortar, and we had a softball team. We had a softball team there at Bechtel. We were city champions and all that stuff. Well, hell, I got a job working for him. I was just mixing mortar and making $50 a week or something like that. I don't remember what the hell it was. But then I got, a guy called me that I knew he was at the aircraft plant. And he said, "Lyall, how would you like to get in the real estate business?" I said, "Hell, why? You know, you miss some time when you're mixing mortar and digging ditches." But I said, "What's the deal?" "Well," he said, "We've got a couple of builders here in town, and they're going to be the biggest builders in Birmingham, Dobbins Brothers." He said, "We're going to have one black subdivision, one white subdivision." He said, "I want you to take the white one, Claude will take the black one." Claude was my partner. He was a big, tall guy, big guy, 240, always smoked a big cigar, you know, and had that big Cadillac out there. So that's how I got in the real estate business.
Wow.
We'd sit out there 7 days a week. And we had a Air Force installation right across the end of the runway. The tar paper shacks where the guys were getting discharged. They were there for part-time. And all those guys, we'd go over there and put a card in their mailbox. CAD, close all deals. Cook, Angevine, and Daniel. And that card said, $10 down, $39 a month. Stove and refrigerator included. We had them coming out there by the hundreds.
Really?
I still have a pistol permit because I'd go home with $300 or $400 in $10 bills from out there on a Sunday. You know, if you didn't sell 10 houses on Sunday, you weren't working. We worked our butt off, you know, night and day.
Wow.
But that was the way it was done.
And you stayed in the real estate business?
Oh yeah, I
The whole
stayed in
career.
the real estate business a long time. I got in the automobile business in 1953. I went to work in Drennan Motor there in Birmingham. They had Chevrolet, Cadillac, and Buick. Kind of a neat hand to hold. And I stayed in the automobile business 4 years. And then I went back to the real estate business.
And ended up in Atlanta, right?
Yep. Got married an Atlanta girl, and here I am. Yeah. But I tell you, there's a lot of things that these guys did hunting buffalo that were a hell of a lot more important than what I did.
Talking about your grandfather.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you one question.
Sure.
When you were out in California, after the war began, you said the initial reaction was there was a great deal of fear that
Yeah.
there was, you know, how long did it take for the locals there, or for people on the West Coast to,
60 days.
okay,
First 60 days they were, because after that, we didn't have that many Jap sub-scares, and that didn't send us home from work early.
right.
Yeah.
So they began to
about
realize that
60
the danger
days.
wasn't imminent,
Yeah.
but, okay.
It wasn't as imminent as we thought it was gonna be.
Well, that's a fascinating story. Is there anything else you would like to talk about?
No, not really. I mean, I'm an open book. No, I tell you, Joe, I've been so fortunate all my life. I was laying out there, I was thinking about when you're on the farm and it's 30 below zero and you're out, the hog lamps have got to be kept burning to keep the water thawed for the hogs. And you're laying out there on your back. It's 35-mile-an-hour winter wind coming up your legs. And you got your damn hands up there for that soot, for that damn thermal, for that heater under that tank. And you get that soot in your hands. Next thing you got it in your mouth, God, you feel like an animal when you come out. It's the worst job in the world being a farmer. It's the biggest gamble in the world to start with. You never know whether you're going to make a dime or not. But it's the hardest work in the world.
Well, you certainly had a variety of experiences.
Oh, God, yes, I've had them.
Sounds like you had a good time.
I really have. It's like they laughed at me when they took a picture of me when I went in the service with my office. Lyall Angevine Supervisor Modification Center was all draped in black and everything. And I said, I can take any damn thing, and the next guy can. $50 a month instead of $600? So what?
Yeah.
What the hell? I've always had a good attitude about anything like that.
Yeah. Well, that's a fascinating story, and I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming in here and sharing it with us. And appreciate what you did for the country during World War II. That was a very important job.
Yeah, it was a very important job, and I'm glad I did it.
Yeah.
And it was not embarrassing at all to me
No,
to look him right in the eye and say, I'm not ashamed of it. I didn't serve that much in the overseas.
You were an important cog in that war. Without those planes, we probably wouldn't have won the war.
Well, it sure helped.
Well, thank you so much again for coming, and thank you for sharing your story and for what you did for the country.
Well, I appreciate it, Joe. I don't know what good it's going to do. I mean, if I'm going to be the congressional record, I guess that's not too shaggy.
That's not shaggy at all.
Forever.
Yeah.
Forever, yeah.
Nice, yeah, go out and put that gun, stick that damn gun in.
You know, I've got a friend I went to college with who has an old, I don't know if it's the same time